Hello and welcome to What Would Jane Do? Now, we have a very special edition of our programme because we have invited Paula Byrne to come and speak to us about her new book, 6 Weeks by the Sea, which has the subtitle The Summer Jane Austen Fell in Love. And it's a bit of a what it says on the tin type title because exactly it's 6 weeks by the sea and Jane Austen falls in love. But Paula, let's do a little bit about you before we go into your book. You are well known as being an expert on Jane Austen from your non-fiction book. Plus, you've written about other literary figures in a biographical sense. So, Kate and I are absolutely delighted to have you with us. So, tell us a little bit about your journey to writing this book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really lovely to be here, especially on the 250th anniversary, which is so exciting. Yeah, so I think the impulse for writing the novel, I think it was twofold really, because I'm known as a biographer of Jane Austen. But two things. So one is over the years when I do literary talks and festivals and all of that, the question I'm asked most often is, did Jane Austen ever fall in love? And I always felt a bit annoyed by that question because I always thought, oh God, here we go again. Everyone's got to fall in love, and why does she have to have fallen in love? And she's given the world all these beautiful books. Um, but I just then thought, well, let's revisit that question. And I think what also happened, I was reading Virginia Woolf on Jane Austen and Virginia Woolf on Persuasion when she says it is proof, if anybody needs to know, that reading Persuasion, we now know Jane Austen fell in love. She must have done. How could she have written about love like she does in Persuasion? So it was those sort of two input. I was thinking, I need to rethink that. I need to revisit that. And because I've been rereading Persuasion and it is so powerful, and I wonder as you get older, it gets more powerful, a read, if you like. So I went back to the Cassandra story that she told her niece Caroline. Now, Caroline was known to be had an excellent memory, very reliable witness. And I was really struck anew about that story where she says, she saw Cassandra and she's an old lady and she's got her mourning ring and she's holding a gold watch and she meets another gorgeous, handsome, amiable young man who she's so taken with. This is Cassandra. And then she hears he dies. And she says, oh, he reminds me of this man that your Aunt Jane fell in love with, who also, was ill. And I just thought, I don't know why we don't talk about this story. This is so powerful. And so the title 6 Weeks by the Sea is a quote from Sanditon. So I thought, so the idea behind, oh, okay, so she thought, oh, 6 weeks by the sea is just the thing. And one of the characters says in Sanditon, so I thought, oh, well, let me just revisit that romance and see what we can do with it.
So, the style you've taken is it feels like a reference to the way stylistically it's set in a sort of Jane Austen tone and theme, but you've got shorter scenes, which is more of our kind of modern take on it. So I think people will be interested to feel that blend of the modern take and the Jane Austen language. So it's a beautiful read. What did you feel as you were tackling this key thing of this little hint from Cassandra, and you knew that everyone's going to leap on it and saying, "You're changing my Jane from her at the worst," or "Thank you for telling me that Jane fell in love because we always wanted her to." What did you feel about that responsibility to someone who is a real person in history?
Well, again, this is a story that we don't really talk about because we tend to focus a bit more on the Tom Lefroy flirtation, which I've always felt very light-hearted. Whereas, as I say, the power of I guess my Jane. I want my Jane to know what it felt like to fall in love, even if it doesn't work out for her, because she's also falling in love with the sea, and she's falling in love with her books, and she calls her books her children. So I think, and again, just thinking, yeah, you're right. She must have known what heartbreak was. How could she write Persuasion? So my Jane's shifted, if you see what I mean. Like I've shifted my own Jane. I was like, oh, she doesn't need to fall. It was ridiculous, silly thing to say. And now I'm like, no, 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 no. She did. I really believe that this suppressed memory is very powerful. Like Cassandra had this memory, and also when she says he was worthy of Jane, I was like, well, that's a pretty big thing to say. And then when I was imagining, I was like, well, who would be worthy of Jane Austen? She's just the greatest genius that ever lived, bar none. So I'm like, who is this man who her sister, who could see all of these incredible things about this woman, would say, yes, finally he is worthy of her. But I know what you mean, and I think we all have our own perception of what Jane is. And I think, in a sense, Jane Austen cultivates this because I think that very intimate authorial voice, which seems to speak directly to people, makes you think she's my friend. I know what she is, and she do, we don't know that, but she's creating this illusion that, oh yeah, you and I were really intelligent, and oh, you're getting the irony, So, and I think this is one of the reasons we feel so passionate about it, because we mistake that ironic voice as being intimacy.
Yeah, I totally get that, Paula, because I think when you speak to a lot of people who love Jane Austen, it is, oh, I would have been friends with her. And probably, no, you wouldn't. She was a very private person. But that's a great quality that a lot of actors and actresses have, and why they get accosted in the street by fans, because people feel they know them and they don't. This is a complete stranger, but they have that charisma and that way of talking to you verbally or in writing, in the case of authors. And you just feel, if I met this person, we would really get on like house on fire. And that's a very powerful tool for reaching out to the viewer or to the reader, isn't it? And I think
I
Jane
think
had
that's
that
such a good
great.
point, Kate. It's such a good point, and I completely agree with you that about that charisma and how you feel we'll be friends. And I'm absolutely sure Jane Austen would say, "No, you're not the sort of person. I don't want to be friends with you." Because she's so super bright and she can be caustic, as we know from the letters. And she's quite scary, really, isn't she? But somehow with that authorial voice. And I think you're so right about actors. As actors, you think they get it. They're so perfect. If I met you, I know we'd get on. But that's the facade. It's the
Yes,
truth.
that's why I'd never go up and ask somebody for an autograph, because what is an autograph? It's a scribble on a bit of paper. It doesn't mean you own them, and yet people act as though they're giving a piece of themselves to you, and that's kind of creepy for me in a way.
Do
But
you feel
but
as well,
yeah,
Paul? Do you think that's partly because as well, it's something that Marlene Dietrich's daughter said, because I wrote a historical novel about Marlene
yes,
Dietrich and her daughter, and what her daughter said was it was the advent of television that made people feel they know someone, because when you
mm,
and she writes very powerfully, when you are in someone's room in their television,
mm,
you feel you're letting them into your world. It's not like going to the cinema. She said, my mum's
no,
different. You go to see a Marlene Dietrich movie and you come away and you come out of the cinema and there's the silver screen. But she said,
it's an event. Yeah,
television's different, isn't it? Television, you're in that person's house. They're letting you in. And if you think of, say, the Colin Firth, Jennifer Ely, you can understand her point of view. It's like, yeah, you're
mm,
in my world now. It's different.
mm.
But I'd just like to point out that Jane Austen wasn't on television, and we still feel the same. So, but then we're reading the book in the privacy of our rooms, aren't we? She's with us. It's like getting a letter
Mm.
from her in some way.
And like Shakespeare, she's so powerful because she speaks to universal truths that you recognize in yourself, and the good and the bad. So I think
Yeah.
that's another reason people feel so intimate with.
I
Well, you're
think
absolutely, yeah, you're right, Julia. That the but the same thing, because we talked about the extension of that as an actor. Why do we feel intimate? So it's the same thing as a read, because reading is very intimate, isn't
Mm.
it? That you're allowing someone into your head. You might be sitting quietly, but it's still and I think it's not real. It's a facade. She's doing it deliberately. She's so clever. She knows she's creating that illusion of being her friend.
But one of the sort of aspects of my question I was asking is what when we do an interpretation of a real person. So thinking of like Hilary Mantel and Thomas Cromwell. I mean, when I've read what I regard as other accounts of Thomas Cromwell, he's a really, really awful person. But when you read her book, he becomes quite sympathetic. And then you see a version on TV. It's Mark Rylance, isn't it? And he
Mm.
becomes even more sympathetic because how could you hate on Mark Rylance? Um, Jane, obviously, you haven't got quite a sort of villain to hero a journey, but we are filling in the gaps, aren't we? And I've done this. I'm guilty as charged. But I think you're free because you're free to do this because you're saying this is fiction. You'd have to couch it differently if it was in your non-fiction work, because you've got a different level of responsibility. But as yours is a novel, so yeah. You can.
I found Paula's book very interesting because I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I thought maybe it's just, generally talking about history. So I was delighted to find out it was a novel, and it was, for me, it was reading what Sanditon ought to be. And
Well,
by that,
let's park Sanditon because we must.
well, yes,
Paula's involved in that, so we
of
don't want
course.
to put her in a difficult point.
But by that, I meant I was very, very taken aback when I read the copy of Sanditon that they'd published, basically, without Jane being able to finish it. And you saw it for the first time, but it was very interesting because you saw it as a book that the author hadn't had a chance to polish yet, and it was quite flat. So initially, I was quite disappointed in it. And then I thought, no, this is actually great because you're just seeing the bare bones that Jane would have then added to later. And of course, it doesn't come across as a Jane Austen novel because she hasn't finished it yet. So that was actually very interesting, like seeing a small sketch before the full painting. But your novel, was like, oh, right, it's finished now. and it was really nice to go into that language and the little scenes. And it felt like the Jane Austen novel that she never wrote, but probably would have done later.
That's just the best. That is the best compliment because I did Woman's Hour recently, and lovely Kylie said, "Oh, I just really did feel like I was reading a Jane Austen novel." I was like, that literally is the best compliment because it's so difficult, and it's really difficult to take her on because she is so clever, she is so funny, she is so wise, all of the things we know about her, and actually trying to inhabit her character.
It's
just
not
a
easy.
6-week slice of
it's like any artist. They make it look easy, but anyone who's ever tried to write a book or paint a painting, you know how hard it is and all the groundwork you have to do. So I think you've succeeded, and I've read a lot of fan fiction that is clearly trying to take off Jane Austen and just failing. So you just get annoyed with it. But that lightness, that deftness of touch, I think you've done it. So well done.
Oh,
Bravo.
bless you. Well, that's really, really lovely to hear because it's not easy. I mean,
it isn't.
Such a challenge. It was such a challenge. And again, just going back to Virginia Woolf, I read something else about biography, and she was talking about the autobiography and saying, look, how can you ever really know anybody? And it's, Julia talking about Cromwell is the perfect analogy here because Hilary Mantel does something that does bring sympathy to the role and it takes them off the flat page, as it were. But Virginia Woolf said, look, this is what all biographers should do. They should just write down a page of facts as they know, where they were born, where they died, how many siblings they had, and then write a novel about them. So I sort of had that in my head too. I thought, well, I've written about Jane Austen for so many years, but that's a very different thing from inhabiting her as a fictional character.
And again, with Thomas Cromwell, the side that he showed to people he was commanding as opposed to the side that he showed to his family could be two different people. So we'll only ever see a facet depending on whose viewpoint we're looking at. And it could be quite different. Somebody could say, oh, I hate him, he was a horrible man. And his family would be, no, he's, sacrificed a lot for us. He was always working really hard and everything. So like Jane Austen, I'm sure her family saw the witty side. Her Cassandra saw maybe the side that when she was upset or sad, and she was also a very private person, I think, from the little I have read. So I don't think she would be wanting the limelight necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think she'd react well to an autograph hunter.
No.
Austen and a stalker, that would be a good.
Oh dear.
That's a sort of vibe, right? Anyway, one of the themes emerging from your book, Paula, is that you've taken a more radical look at Jane Austen, following the sort of scholarship around her, because she isn't a person who overtly engages in politics. It's a hint here or there, but you've leaned into some of the grounded suppositions about her views on things like abolition, homosexuality, for example. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the decisions you were taking in that case? Because there are some important in the book, the themes of particularly abolition and homosexuality.
Yeah, so I was thinking, going back to what kind of man could attract somebody of the genius that we know and love as Jane Austen. And I was just thinking, what kind of man would that look? What would he be like? What would his politics be? So I just spent a lot of time sort of sketching out what that character might look like. And I thought, because we know that she had such pro-abolition sympathies, and we know that she loved Thomas Clarkson, who was this really interesting man who wrote the first history of the slave trade. And I got very obsessed with Thomas Clarkson when I wrote the Dido Bell book as well, because what I loved about him as an abolitionist, he went round Liverpool and Bristol and he spoke to people on the ground level to say, we know this is horrendous. We know what's happening on those ships, and look at these manacles. And it was a very sort of grassroots approach. And of course, he found this man called Norris, Miss James Norris, who was a slave owner, and said, "Oh, they're all treated really well, and the slaves, they have a great time. We give them limes. They don't have scurvy, you know." And it's all nonsense. And Norris was this real villain. And I think, and Jane Austen, we know, really liked Thomas Clarkson, and her brothers obviously were very anti the slave trade because they were, you know, sort of involved in it as sailors. So I thought, to my mind, she would fall in love with a man who had those political sympathies, because this was the hot potato of the day. You couldn't move without people talking about this issue. It was the most pressing issue, and we know from the little glimpses we have where her sympathies lay. So that was sort of one part that I really thought, no, she would. And I found this real character, Samuel Rose. It's not him, obviously, but he was abolitionist. He loved Cooper's poems. I was like, oh my God, if you know, that's the man she would have fallen in love with, because not only is he a lawyer and he defended William Blake, he also was an editor and loved Goldsmith, all the people that she loved, and Cooper particularly. So that was a sort of gift for me to work on as a character. And then the homosexuality thing, you know.
Oh, sorry, can we just do a sidebar there? Because you mentioned a couple of things there which people may have missed and haven't read the afterward. Is that you name check Dido Bell. Do you want to just say what you did with Dido Bell, and they may know about her already from a film, just so people understand the connection to abolition?
So I wrote the book. A film was made of the book, so I wrote the book alongside the film, which was a really interesting true story about a mixed race little girl who was brought to England by her father, Sir John Lindsay, and she was raised by Lord Mansfield, who was part of the abolition movement, and was a firm favourite, and raised alongside her white cousin Elizabeth Murray, who Jane Austen met later on. So it was a very direct link. The Finch Hattons, she married a Finch Hatton, Elizabeth Murray, so very known to Jane Austen. Jane Austen had tea with her and played with her little boy. So real direct link there, and everyone knew who Dido Bell was. You know, it's impossible to imagine that she would not have known about Dido Bell. And of course, because of Miss Lamb in Sanditon, which we'll talk about later, but the fact that Jane Austen very clearly has a mixed race, wealthy, attractive woman in Sanditon speaks volumes about where she's taking her fiction, to me, because Sanditon has such a different feel. And she's, you know, who knows what would have happened with Miss Lamb. But Miss Lamb, to me, was a very Dido Bell character. And then recently, one of my characters in the novel is a woman called Lady Brocas. And I recently discovered that Lady Brocas, who married into the aristocracy, was also mixed race. Her mother was an enslaved woman who eventually lived in Manchester. And she had two brothers and married into the aristocracy, which is just so extraordinary. I mean, just how we view history.
It's an amazing leap. Yeah.
It's such a leap. And you just think, oh my goodness, you know, money matters more than race in Britain, which I've always suspected. And I said that to Andrew Davis, said, I've got a feeling money matters. And then there was a very good book written about this by, I can't remember his name, Michael somebody, and he's about how mixed race children came to England to be educated because places like Jamaica were more racist. They would say only whites, you know, come to this school, and nobody cared in England. Nobody cared. They were like, oh yeah, you can go to you have this governess and you can come here. So I found that was very fascinating. So nobody wants to pin these things onto a narrative because the reader can sense it. But to me, it was a tribute to Sanditon having the little girl who was sort of, to me, was a prototype Dido Bell and a prototype Miss Lamb. So to me, I wanted her to be just a character that Jane Austen would see and relate to. So that's where that strain came from.
And you also name checked someone who was a sort of template for one of your heroes, Mr. Rose. Can you just say his name again and who he was? Because we skipped over that super fast.
Sorry. Yeah, so I found this real character called Samuel Rose, who seemed to me the sort of man that Jane Austen might have fallen in love with. And this man was a lawyer. He famously was the lawyer for William Blake in a famous sedition case. The poet William Blake. Rose was also the real Rose. He was also an abolitionist. He loved the poems of Cooper. He edited the works of Goldsmith. So he was a literary, cultivated, caring man with passionate politics. And I just thought, yeah, that is the kind of man. And of course, it's fiction. My rendition of him is entirely fictional. But it was just that sense of what sort of person, is he more Darcy? Is he more Knightley? You get those sort of different types in Jane Austen. So it was really, for me, it was really important that I found, and I read his letters, I read his trial, I read this account of the trial. I really tried to inhabit William Rose's world in order to try to find the sort of man. And William Rose was also consumptive. So that was important.
Yeah, we won't go too far down that line. So, okay, right. So that's the abolition theme. Let's turn to the homosexual theme. Without giving away too many plot spoilers, it is a twist in the tale that you can see coming with a modern
lens.
Yeah, with a modern lens, but perhaps you may not expect female characters in particular at the time to have picked up on this. But your take is that Jane Austen would have been much more in the know, and probably the Regency women are actually much more in the know than, say, their Victorian counterparts, I think.
Oh, I would 100% agree with you, Julia. And it's a different age to Victorian. It's a much less restricted age. And if you look at the great Cruikshank and Gilray caricatures, you can just see how much people were, and they were plastered all over shop windows.
Yeah, nothing was sacred at all, was it? It was right out there in the open.
Exactly, nothing was sacred. And the idea that people wouldn't know about homosexuality is just bizarre. And we know that Jane Austen, when she was a very young girl, makes a joke about James I's pet, James Carr pet. We know that her brothers had to flog men for homosexuality. It seems to me, and she makes the joke about Rears and Vices in Mansfield Park. So it seems to me that, this is a woman who is she knows what time it is. Like, she knows the score. She's got these brothers who write intimate letters to her, and she writes intimate letters to them. So, and again, just the age is just much freer, both in clothes and morals and everything else. And we lose a lot, don't we, with the Victorians? We get the corsets back, and we get the crinolines, and we sort of, with that comes, the suppression of women again. So it always felt to me like a freer age. So again, I just wanted this plot point. I found out, I won't give too much away, but I found a newspaper cutting in Hampshire in 1801 where two men were hanged for sodomy. And I just thought, gosh, and that's in the newspaper. We know she read newspapers. We know people shared newspapers. Was a great newspaper reader. What do you think she's going to do? Not read the bit that says two men were hanged for sodomy. She's just going to brush over it. No, she's not. So it was just like, we need to tell this story because it's a very painful thing to be a sailor, and you're surrounded by men intimately in a small space, but
yet you're very isolated from anything else. So
totally isolated. It would have been
totally in your face. Well, like when men are in prison.
Exactly. And then having to hide it because it's that important that you will die. You will lose your life if you're discovered. So, and I just thought, I know that she would have known. I know she read newspapers. I know she knew stuff from her brothers. I know she jokes about it. Mary Crawford jokes about it. And the Navy's reputation for that, is the joke. So I just thought that I need to have a character who has a secret.
I mean, there's even that saying, "Rum, sodomy, and the lash." You can't be more obvious.
The idea that Jane Austen would be unaware, it's just like, really?
She wouldn't have been that precious, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, so we'll allow her to be intelligently observant, aren't we? So, so Katie, I was wondering if you want to take the lead on questions about the daily life, because I think, even though it's a slight book in terms of word length, It's absolutely chock-a-block with fascinating details of Regency life. Well, it's pre-Regency.
Yes, no, it's
Um,
lovely.
we're in 1801, 1802. When are we?
1801.
1801. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, absolutely. No, I love the bits of going to the circulating library and him showing his affection or attraction to her by letting her borrow the first copy of Evelina, I think it is.
Belinda.
It's actually
Belinda, I
Belinda.
beg your pardon. I beg your pardon, but Belinda. Yes, I get my Lenas mixed
This
up.
is Edgeworth, not Fanny
Of
Burney.
course. Oh dear. So yes, to a book reader and someone who devours books voraciously, and I always feel like I need to apologize to authors for reading a book in a day, as I did yours, Paula. Apologies. You know, you take years or months to write the thing, and then we just gulp it down like it's Kentucky Fried Chicken. But for me, that is possibly another great compliment to an author is, you know, when you say you can't put the book down, I must finish this. you say, or try to savor it and savor it, but you can't. So I always feel very apologetic about reading them as fast as I do. I can't help myself. So yes. So for me, somebody buying somebody a book or sharing a book, and we always say, don't we, that if somebody likes Jane Austen, you're seeing a book recommend a person. It's somebody who has the good taste to like a book. So that was a lovely little meet cute, if I dare use that term, for people showing each other how they valued each other. And I thought it was especially nice, obviously, for Jane Austen, who loved books as well as writing them.
Oh, I love that, and thank you so much. And that is a compliment. But again, Sarah, there were these moments of serendipity when I was thinking, God, I really hope Frank was with the family in the summer of 1801. Then I discovered he was.
Thank goodness for that. Yes.
And I'm like, where, you know, and then thinking, oh gosh, wouldn't it be brilliant? Because Belinda, the first edition of Belinda has a relationship between a white person and a mixed race person, which was later edited out. Which again was so perfect for me with my interest in that. And I thought, oh, wonder when Belinda, and it was the summer of 1801. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is all falling together. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could do the meet cute? And I love that. In the circulating library, they're both going for the same book because obviously he's got to be a novel reader. And circulating libraries, as we know from Fanny Burney and Maria Edgeworth, you know, they weren't just where you could get books, you can buy jewelry, you can get trinkets, you know.
They were like the social hub of the day.
They were the social hub of the day. They're not like we think of libraries now.
It's like going to the mall.
Yeah.
Because there was so much going on.
And there's a really great funny scene in Camilla, isn't there, where she's at a library and she buys a trinket and there's some big plot point over the trinket. So I thought that would be a really good place for them to meet with all its potential. So trying to get so I was so lucky that those things happened because I thought, God, you can't make this up. This is absolutely, and I wanted it to be Belinda for all those reasons, but also because the main character, the sort of anti-heroine, is a drug addict. It's a very topical novel. Lady Delacour, I think her name is Devine, something Lady D. And I, you know, just a really astonishing portrait of this older woman who has a secret addiction, and Belinda's the person who saves her. And I just thought, I've always loved Belinda, and wouldn't it be marvelous if that could? And it worked perfectly.
And that's what I love about history is it's always more fascinating, more intimate, more intriguing than anything you could imagine. So the more you find out, the more you're amazed by it, and the more you identify with people from the past. And that's what I try to do in reenacting, is to tell people these are not funny, strange people that you have nothing in common with. These are your ancestors. And in fact, I always say, if you were to swap somebody from the modern day and somebody from the past, however many years ago, the person from the past would always win because they have far better practical survival skills than you ever would in the past.
So I'm intrigued, Kate, that you went for circulating library because the detail I went for was leeches.
Well, I love leeches. Yeah. I even have a pet leech in a tin. Not a real one. One I've nicked off our surgeon.
Fake leech.
Fake leech.
This because Paula, one of you is also connected to a famous scholar called John Bate. Well, by marriage.
It still counts.
Have you? Yeah. And of course, is a Wordsworth expert. And one of the places many people who know about leeches will know the poem The Leech Gatherer. And there was a job um, going out into the countryside and standing in muddy pools to get leeches on you to be used in medical practice. So it looks like, Kate, for those of you watching this, you can see she's going to probably get her leech to show us. Um, did you have fun investigating? Oh, here we go. We got an image. There we go.
Oh, wow.
It's a contemporary print of three women bare-legged standing in a pond doing their leech gathering. I think
Oh my God, I love that.
that's the frontispiece of your next novel.
I
Oh
love
my
leech
God,
gathering.
that is fascinating. But no, that was really fun because again, and this is a sort of slight Sanderson thing, is in thinking about why people come to the seaside,
Mm.
Mm.
you're thinking about leisure and you're thinking about health. And I was also really fascinated in that. And Jane Austen's always ahead of the game, always. She's either riding the crest of the wave or she's ahead of the game. And so we get this movement from spa towns to the seaside. And a huge part of that is to do with transport and better roads. So you can get to the seaside now. You can get there quicker. You can get in more comfortably. The roads are better. And so people say, why would I go to a spa town when I can go to the seaside? I can see this beautiful scenery and I can swim and I'll feel better and I can take the waters and I can be leached and, all of these things. So I just thought, gosh, it would be brilliant. And I think it was a letter where Jane Austen's mother is being leached. I think I got it from there and I was like, brilliant. I'm definitely going to have a scene where that happens. So that was a real detail that I thought, but do people really, I was almost thinking visually how that would look because, and of course it did provide relief. We all go, that's horrible. But actually, there's lots of evidence that that was a really good method.
Well,
And
they use leeches today in modern medicine. A lot of people don't realize this, but they do because if you
yeah,
get a finger chopped off and then you reattach that finger, put a leech on the end of it, it's going to draw the blood up the finger and make that connection again.
Right.
exactly.
That is a fascinating detail I did not know.
Mm,
But on the
uh-huh.
in case we've got English listeners, we might want to move on to, well, it's equally sad in a medical sense. That was a heroic medical story. Now we're turning to sad one because one of the things I appreciated in your novel is the melancholy fact of early deaths. We only
Mm.
need to look at Jane Austen's own circle, the number of times her brothers marry, for example, because various wives pass away in childbirth, but there are other forms of
Oh,
death.
Cassandra's husband or fiance dying so soon.
Yeah, it was yellow fever or something, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And your book negotiates that. So did you feel that living in a world where the average lifespan was probably, well, in a London it was only 25, but probably more like 40 or 50 outside of the capital, um, outside the cities, did you feel that it gave your characters a different sense of the fragility of life or their perspective on their own lifespans?
Yeah, I was just chatting about this with a friend actually about this very topic in Jane Austen's time. And we were just saying that they were just much closer to death and probably much better
Mm.
at dealing with it. You know how they would lay out a corpse and when Jane Austen writes those two wonderful letters to Frank, she thinks the first one's got lost, and she talks about the serenity, the beauty of the corpse. They were much closer to it. They had a much healthier reaction to it because it's not all taken away from you. You're there and you're living and of course childbirth and women dying in childbirth, and we know that happened, and Jane Austen often went to assist when she was 19. She assisted a cousin in childbirth. I really wanted to bring across that, try to get across that you're smallpox, Martha Lloyd
Mm.
with her smallpox.
Yes.
And the only son of the Martha Lloyd family died of smallpox. They lived with that. They saw people with pockmarked faces. People died younger, women died in childbirth. And so I think they just had a healthier way. I don't know what you think, Kate, but I felt just almost a healthy way because they
I
don't
think
try
you would
and
be
hide it
more
away.
pragmatic about it, certainly, because, as you say, death is always with us. And I don't think the grief would have been any less, obviously not. But I think you would certainly have had to be more accepting of it just because of how prevalent it was, how many infants died, how many old people got taken away much sooner than they would today. Yes, people did still live long lives. I mean, look at Mr. Woodhouse, and they had older people. But I think this thing about nature taking out the infirm and the sick very, very quickly, and then only the fit survive. These days, with all of our health remedies, it's fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but people are surviving now that would never have survived then. And people say, "Oh, we never had allergies back in my day." Well, yes, you did, but people probably died of them pretty quickly, which took it out of the general population or just got on with it.
And your story
yeah.
mentions the fact that Jane and her family were vaccinated, or the form of vaccination they had then, and survived, whereas Martha Lloyd's family didn't.
Yes, which I like. That was a very good point.
For those of you who are worried about vaccinations out there, Jane Austen did it, so please don't get vaccinated. That's our public health service broadcast, which is very unfortunately relevant today. Moving on from early deaths, one of the other things that really I loved, and I expect you've written it for people like me, is there is a lot in there about the generation of writers just before Jane. So we've got the poet Cooper, the playwright Goldsmith, we've got
William Blake.
Edgeworth, the novelist, we've got William Blake, the poet, who are probably people do know of. Do you feel that we overlook these writers because we go to the big hitters of the Romantics and Jane, and then we sort of leap to them, to the Brontes and so on? We sort of miss people who were the formative writers for the writers we tend to still read.
Oh, for sure. And I think Cooper's just such a good example of that because, you almost feel like the Romantic writers couldn't have been the Romantic poets without Cooper. And we know that Cooper was, according to family legend, that he was her favourite poet and also suffered terribly from mental health issues and melancholia. And he's such an interesting, brilliant poet. So I really did want, and then as it happened, the real Samuel Rose was actually a friend of Cooper. And I thought, oh my God, this is a great way to bring Cooper in. And for those people who don't know much about Cooper, because he's not well known, he's not read, but he was Jane Austen's favourite poet for a reason. So it was really, and Maria Edgeworth, probably people don't read her so much today. Probably Fanny Burney they do, but Maria Edgeworth they don't. And Belinda's so extraordinary, and it's one of the ones that Jane Austen names in her great defence of the novel in Northanger Abbey when she's talking about which are the greatest novels, and Belinda is one of them. So that shows how much she adored that novel. So it was really important to me that I didn't do the big hitters, the words Blake for sure, but then that was a true story anyway, and Rose did defend William Blake. So for me, I again, it's that detail, I mean, Martha Lloyd's household book was just a source of never-ending brilliant, like the recipes that I did. You've just got to get that detail right. You have to ground it in that right in the detail, because it does make you want to throw the book across the room if you just think, oh my God, nobody would do that. And then discovering that Frank's favorite curry recipe was there, and I was like, oh, I love that. And so these things, you're trying to ground your novel in real details. So it was a joy really to return to Cooper.
I mean, history is always surprising. So on the curry thing, I've written my next novel is called The Austen Intrigue, so it involves Jane Austen in this series I'm writing, which is a sort of detective story, which involves the 1812 situation of the Austen family. And one of the things I was looking at was places to eat in London at the time. And there's an Indian restaurant, the first ever Indian restaurant. Only lasted a short time, but it was set up by an Indian man who came out of the army, and Jane Austen has an Indian takeaway, but
I love it
because I thought
I love that.
Yeah.
How did you discover that?
Oh, rabbit holes.
Yeah.
I mean, I started with investigating what Gunter's served, because Gunter's appears in all those romantic novels.
Yes.
As the ice cream place. And there's a Gunter's recipe book. There you are, look that up. And I looked, and there's a scene in my novel where my two characters are choosing the most outrageous flavors. And one of them chooses burnt almond, and the other one chooses parmesan
I've
ice.
actually had some parmesan ice cream. It's
Yeah,
actually really
parmesan
nice.
ice cream sounds like a
No, it
good
works. It
pal
works.
type thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went down this rabbit hole completely of other extraordinary culinary because they had a very exotic diet, those who could
Mm.
afford it, because of empire influences coming in. Anyway, I've led us astray from the.
It's too easy to do this. There's so
Yeah,
much to talk about.
we must have you back, Paula, to just talk about food. Anyway, can we talk about Sanditon? Because you were one of the experts who were informing that series. Do you want to tell us about the role of an expert when they get involved in a Jane Austen adaptation? You're not the screenwriter, are you? Nothing to do with that.
No, so what you do is you read all the scripts as soon as they come in, and you're looking for inaccuracies or anachronisms and anything like that. And so it's a really fun thing to do. And I do remember with Sanditon, the first scene had the women and men bathing together. And I just absolutely went ballistic and went, no. And it was very fun saying that to Andrew Davis. No, that does not happen. There are different times of day and they are different. And I was like, that just no. And I'm like, you do what you want, but as your expert, that that's just a step too far. And then you get these lovely moments when you go, "Oh, that word could not have been used," and you go off to Samuel Johnson's dictionary and you think, "Oh, it was." But it's, you're sort of surprised
Yeah.
yourself. But with with Sanditon, with series 2 and 3, because of the fans bringing it back, which I thought was extraordinary. It was really an interesting moment, I think, in culture, and popular culture and social media. I got much more involved. They were going to ditch the character of Miss Lamb, and I was
Really?
like, and I just said, don't do that.
No.
Don't do that. I said, that's such a mistake. So I was
Yeah.
much more involved in those meetings where I said, no, this is the gift of a character. This is Jane Austen showing how aware she is of these political themes. And I said, I cannot believe that you think she's got to the end of her arc and her story. I
Mm.
was like, she needs to, we don't know what Jane Austen was going to do with Miss Lamb. We just don't know. But the fact that she is there and she's wealthy and everybody kowtows to her is really significant. So
Mm.
I had much more of I think my role changed a little bit. So I was much more involved behind the scenes in shape. So they said, well, how would you see Miss Lamb's arc develop? I said, well, she could be involved in the sugar boycott, which is how women became political on a domestic level by saying, well, we can't do much about the slave trade, but hey, we buy the sugar. So
We
stop
can
buying
hit them where
sugar
it hurts, like they do today.
like they do today. So
Yeah.
women do have power. It might
Mm.
be limited power, but that is really powerful if you go,
It
well,
is.
I'm not buying sugar because I don't approve of the slave trade. So I was much more involved in actually plotting as well, which was a lot of really interesting and fun.
That's absolutely fascinating. So we can look at that series again with new eyes to
Mm.
see the saves you made. Have you got your own theory? This is unfair to ask probably, but have you got your own theory what Jane Austen would have done with the novel?
Do you know, I don't, I really, I really like what Kate said as well about you. It's like you're seeing a sketch, but of the oil painting. And I think Kate's absolutely spot on because it's quite a difficult read, Sanditon, for all the reasons Kate said. So I won't repeat them, but because there's no polish there, and it's such a really good point. So it's difficult to know, but I think the fact is that really it's about entrepreneurship. It's so ahead of its time that this man saying, I'm going to turn this seaside town into, this is my baby, this is my project, I'm going to get people to come to the seaside. It feels so fresh and almost like the rise of the emergence of the middle classes, the ranks. So,
Mm.
which again, she seems to be right on top of riding that wave, and we just
Don't
can't.
you think she would have just had an absolute field day with all these health crazes? She was seeing
100%.
people in Bath taking the waters, and then the seaside boom. She could see
Yeah, and you
just
know,
what a
Kate, she's
boon it
got
would all be.
well, the two, the hypochondriac sisters drinking
Yes,
green tea. You just couldn't. I mean, it's so Gwyneth Paltrow goop.
yes, it
It's
so
it's
is.
actually hilarious, and
It is.
I think it would have been a much more of a sprawling Victorian style novel. It always has a
Mm.
Middlemarchy sort of
Mm.
feel that the ensemble. See, it's an ensemble. Something maybe Miss Lamb would have had a really interesting trajectory. Maybe a fortune hunter might have gone for her, and what would happen with Charlotte? Well, we were sort of meant to believe that she falls in love with what's his name, Sydney.
Mm,
But it just feels so different. It just
mm.
has that a different energy where it's not really about landed gentry. I mean, we're not in landed gentry with Persuasion, are we? We're like a
No.
very different hero. This is a self-made man. And
Mm,
the next one, we've got entrepreneur heading things up. And you just go, where's she taking this? And it's such a pity because
mm.
she seems to be, to me, to be taking the novel in such an interesting new direction. So I mean, I certainly think it would have been radical, in inverted commas, in terms of we're just not in the scene of landed gentry. We're not in the scene of aristocrats in their big homes. That we're not there. We're just not. And I doubt very much she'd have taken us back to that. She's already plotting the next chapter, as it were.
Well, just as the Elliots leave their house behind, that's the moment where you feel she's leaving all that behind. And it's the landless gentry that she's making fun of at that point, with their books, their peerages, but no honor. Um,
No.
so that's been absolutely fascinating, Paula. Thank you so much. Would you like to mention any Jane Austen news you have, like where you'll be appearing to talk about the book or anything else related?
Oh yeah, I mean, do look. I think on my Instagram and on my Twitter, Paula Jane Byrne. You'll see the list of all. I'm actually giving a talk at Sidmouth, which will be lovely because the novel's set in Sidmouth, and Brid at Port Literary Festival. Quite a few festivals. But the other thing I do, if I could just quickly mention, I've just finished. I've just completed a 10-part series called When I Met Jane Austen, in which I interview 10 writers, five men, five women, quite big hitters as well, and talk about when they first met and fell in love with Jane Austen and how she influenced their work. And that's coming out on Radio 4 at the minute, possibly the end of November, beginning of December. And then it will be a podcast of 2 hour special as well. So look out for that because it is fascinating.
Scoop, you heard it here first, viewers.
Yes. And Kate, what about general Jane Austen news? Because we're about to go into the madness of the Jane Austen
Well,
Festival.
it will be utter madness. They've actually had to limit the promenade this year to 2,000. So all the wristbands are sold out, which is unprecedented. And they've actually had to say to people, well, this is the council limiting it rather than the Jane Austen Centre. They've actually had to say to people, do not join the promenade. You can see it when it goes off. You can meet it at the end, and it's a very short one. But don't join in, as they often do, to avoid the council.
Wow.
So what
Because
date? What
they're
date
worried
is
about
that?
it. That's on the Saturday. I think it's the 13th. I think.
Okay,
I need to look
of
back
September
of September.
2025, in case you're listening
It's
to this.
literally about a week away. Oh my
That's
gosh, it's a week away.
amazing.
Yeah.
So it's going to be absolutely chocker. But the good news is, and they've devised 100 events at least for this festival, as well as events that other people have brought into it. Most of them are sold out, and there'll be thousands of people all over the world joining in because of the 250th, obviously. But the 33rd Foot are camped at the Holborn for this first weekend, and our events are free. So come along and see us. I'm doing a talk on ordinary women in Regency times, as I feel that they need a bit of a mention. They didn't just marry and have babies, and that was it. And my husband's doing a talk on dueling, which is always very popular. We may even have Colonel Brandon and Mr. Willoughby dueling. So come along and find out who wins.
And who can resist a red coat?
Indeed.
Just on my news, kind of, why not? That I've got two things happening in the next few months. One is my novel, The Diamond of Drury Lane, which was my initial novel,
I love that one.
which is set in 1790, is coming out as a modern children's classic, along with things like Wind in the
Excellent.
Willows this
Hmm.
month. So if you want to get the typical reader would be someone who's like 9 or 10, that kind of middle
Oh,
grade.
wow.
Or me.
Or Kate.
I love a good story is a good story.
Yeah.
And I utterly subscribe to the thought that, soon you'll be old enough to read fairy tales again.
Oh,
I'm just
I
shocked.
so agree. I'm obsessed with children's
I
fiction.
love story. Yeah, I love
I
young
love
adult.
children. I'm E. Nesbit. I'm rereading them all. I absolutely love children's fiction.
Yeah, and my comfort go-to. And
I'm
Julia told a
reading
damn good
these-
story.
That is such a weird snap. I am reading E. Nesbit as just now.
There you go.
Secret of the Amulet. So many ideas went into Narnia. But anyway, and the other news is, just as I mentioned, the Austen Intrigue, which is a real murder case involving the Jane Austen family, which I fictionalized my answer to. Anyway, it's been absolutely fantastic having you today,
Yeah,
Paula.
thank you so much,
you.
Paula.
You're always welcome back. Just to
We
join.
feel we're friends now, Paula.
Oh, we are absolutely friends.
But not in a
And
creepy stalker way.
No, we're not asking for your autograph.
oh no, but look, I'd love to do it again sometime. It's been really, really fun talking to you. So thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Our pleasure.